bum bum bottom 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 bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum bottom ba da da 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 ba 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 doobie doobie da da bum bum ba.
You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
I'm Brad Gullickson.
And each month we evaluate a different iconic romance within the four-color realm. But in this episode, we are haunting the hallowed halls of the Mignolaverse, chatting with writer Rob Williams and writer-artist Warwick Johnson-Cadwell about their new Hellboy-adjacent properties, and celebrating the weird, wild world of Mike Mignola.
I like how you went a little sensual.
Was that sensual? I was going for like creepy, spooky.
Well, I think you were going for creepy, spooky, and then you found your way into sexy.
Oh no! I've got to back my way out.
No, stay in the sexy.
I don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable.
With our best comics of 2021 episodes now finally out there in the world and doing so well, thank you everybody for sharing those episodes.
Yes.
We can now officially begin 2022 at Comic Book Couples Counseling. And we're going to do that with 2 episodes, 2 creator corners to close out January, because these people are really, really cool. They agreed to come on the podcast. Also, it gives us a little more emotional time to deal with launching our first comic book couple session of the new year, which is going to be a return to Marco and Alana in Saga. With, what is that? That's trades 5 through 9. And man, like, I'm really nervous about returning to those comics because they destroyed me the first time. And Lisa, you have not read them yet. You don't know what's coming.
I do kind of know what's coming.
People spoiled it.
But I know that it's going to be heavy. I know that I love these characters. They're precious to me. And it's going to be good to have a little emotional buffering time before wading into that.
Yeah. And so we're taking on some really great creator corners for the next 2 weeks. Full disclosure, we're also attending the virtual film festival Sundance during this time period. We're watching a lot of movies, and we want to point you to comicbookcouplescounseling.com, where you'll be seeing reviews of those films there. Plus, Lisa is covering it for AIPT Comics, and I'll be covering it for Film School Reject. So it's a hectic time, but we didn't want to take a break from the show. And again, oh my God, Rob Williams and Warwick Johnson-Cadwell said, can we come on your show? Who are we to deny them?
The Mignolaverse and Hellboy comics specifically hold a very special and honored place in our relationship.
Yeah.
They were the first brick of comics Brad passed to me, where he said, if you want to understand me as a person, you have to read and know and love these books.
Is that what I said?
This is something, let me put this out there. Free advice from me, Lisa Gullickson, to you, listener. Do not hand someone you're dating like something that will take more than 2 hours to emotionally handle. He should have given me those 1 volume at a time. I think it did start 1 volume at a time, and I was like, this is interesting. And then you're like, here's the rest of it.
I think we've had tremendous growth. I've had tremendous growth since that point in my life, and I would not approach anyone with comics that way today, because I think I used to believe that my identity was wrapped up in the characters I love, and I think that causes a lot of problems and also causes a lot of disappointments in relationships when they don't necessarily jive with them. But I don't know, like I don't know if you necessarily didn't jive with the Hellboy comics.
Oh, I love them, and I love them even more over time.
Yeah, but
the stakes felt really high.
Right, and there were moments early on in our dating where I was like, you gotta love the Coen brothers. You gotta love No Country for Old Men. And when you didn't love No Country for Old Men, like, I felt hurt. And I think that's not your fault. That is definitely my fault. Like, we don't need to love all the same things. If we don't love the same things, people, that doesn't mean we can't operate on the same playing field. But I was a much younger person then.
I also think we're kind of talking about two different things.
Okay, yeah.
Where, like when you are dating someone, a mixtape is way stronger than giving someone your entire record collection.
I see. Yes. And so I had handed you my entire record collection.
Exactly.
Right. I should have just given you, like, The Chained Coffin and other stories.
It is about curation when you're
Yes.
trying to entice someone to be curious about a world. Lucky for you, I love homework.
Yeah.
And I love an assignment. And but I did read those comics way too fast. And I felt like on that first pass, I didn't really understand the relationship between Hellboy and folklore. I hadn't read that many comics before that. I had read Sandman and Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, and that was maybe it. So I felt like I really hadn't, adjusted to the medium exactly.
And I think one of the great things about Hellboy, even for myself, is when I first read those comics, I really didn't appreciate them until the second, the third, the fourth. They're highly rereadable comic books. They're the type of comic books that only get better as you revisit them. And that actually comes up in one of the conversations you're about to listen to, either with Rob Williams or with Warwick Johnson-Cadwell. I can't remember exactly. But that's the delight of these books.
I would love to, at some point in comic book couples counseling, maybe on the Patreon, somehow cover Hellboy. Well, we've been doing, like, couples, but I think that a man's relationship with himself and with gaining an understanding of himself is also something really valuable to talk about. And I think that there is a lot of richness in the Hellboy comics in particular. Oh, yeah. I think we could definitely cover Hellboy in our regular sessions. I like the angle of self-care for one, right? I also think, we're in the middle of covering Sandman issue by issue, right? 76 issues, 76 episodes on our Patreon feed. And when we're finally done with that in a year and a half, where do we go after that? I think a Hellboy complete reread on the Patreon would be a lot of fun as well. I think that's something that Sandman and Hellboy have in common is, I'm going to steal something, a phrase from Jackie Cation. Oh, yeah, the comedian. She refers to a dork forest. I feel like Sandman and Hellboy are interesting dork forests within the landscape of comic books. Yeah. Like, the people who choose to live in those universes first and foremost are not like the comic book fans you would meet anywhere else. Like, they're an interesting entry point to people who are into folklore or horror or fantasy. I mean, I think Sandman and Hellboy are gateway comics. Like, if you come from folklore or film or literature, or you're just a little emo gothy goth, and you wander into these realms and you discover, like, oh, this medium is actually pretty cool. And Sandman will then send you to the books of magic, right? And Hellblazer. Hellboy will send you over to the BPRD and Lobster Johnson and Witchfinder. And then from those areas, you might now start to feel comfortable wading into those other comic books that you've always heard about but have never tried out. Before you know it, you're reading Long Halloween. Long Halloween takes you to the New 52. The New 52 gets you reading superhero comics. And before you know it, you're just reading Spider-Man like the rest of us. You're not so cool and different. Can you tell I'm totally intimidated by goths? A little bit, I so wanted to be one and never could pull it off. All that being said, when you do start reading BPRD, and if you jump from BPRD to reading Justice League or Avengers books, like, you see how, well, you see what makes
Mignolaverse so special? Because there is no going back from some of these catastrophic events. And this is what we really get into with Rob Williams. Like when something happens in the BPRD, when a creature rises from the ground and erases a portion of America, that portion of America does not grow back. The world is ending, and we now have to exist in this new America, this new world, this new lifestyle. And you keep thinking that these books are building to an ending where a reset will occur. And I thought we were there after Plague of Frogs and Hell on Earth. But BPR kept going. The characters kept going. The planet did not blink out of existence. But it sure as heck looked a lot different than when I read the first issue of Seed of Destruction back in 1990 whatever.
What is holding my fascination right now with the Mignolaverse is we have a hard stopping point. We have a timeline with an ending. And now with sort of Hyperborea, which is what we're going to be talking about with Rob Williams, is that we're now finding a way to traverse the areas between the points on the timeline. Yeah,
and that's always been one of the gifts of Hellboy, is that when you read those earliest stories, it jumps from the 70s to the 90s to the 60s to the 40s, and then it just kept on going back and back and back to like Witchfinder, and now with the Sword of Hyperborea, like a different age before man as we know it.
I think one of the limitations people who don't read comic books all of the times thinks that comics have is like, there's no stakes because you can just start over and people come back to life and blah, blah, blah. And what the Mignolaverse is proving is that that doesn't have to be the case.
Yes, absolutely. And so the first conversation you're going to hear is with Rob Williams. Rob Williams is returning to Comic Book Couples Counseling. We spoke to him last year after the release of Judge Dredd End of Days, and had a great time talking all things 2000 AD with him. And now here he is, hanging out in the Mignolaverse. He's just as excited to be there as we are to have him there. He sounds very much like we would sound if we were suddenly given the keys to this particular kingdom, right? Like, what an honor, what a privilege to muck about with these toys. And this is probably a good place to read the plot synopsis for Sword of Hyperborea #1, taken straight from the Dark Horse Comics website. From the ancient warrior Gul Dunar to Sir Edward Grey to the BPRD's Agent Howards, the iconic Hyperborean sword from the world of Hellboy has landed in many influential hands. And this has been no accident. Trace the sword's path through the adventures and encounters that finally brought it to Ragnarok at the end of the world, and witness the sword's journey through history.
Okay, Brad, one more time, more sensuous.
Oh, I'm not going to do it one more time, but maybe I'll read the credits a little sensuously.
Ooh.
Written by Mike Mignola and Rob Williams. Well, you don't like it? You don't like that?
I got creeped out.
Written by Mike Mignola and Rob Williams. Art by Lawrence Campbell. Letterer Clem Robbins. Colorist Quentin Winter and Dave Stewart on the cover colors. And Lisa and I had so much fun with this comic book, and I think it really does operate the way a #1 issue should operate. You do not need to be a die-hard BPRD fan to appreciate the mystery of this storyline, and I think it engages your curiosity enough where you could just stick with the Sword of Hyperborea and continue going forward. But I would also bet that there's enough there. If you read this, I think you'll engage with it. Lawrence Campbell's art is astonishing. You'll want to travel backwards, but that's not a necessity.
Clearly, Brad and Lisa are super excited about this comic, but if we can't sell it to you, Rob Williams can. He is great to talk to. He gives good interview.
He sure does. And then once this interview is done, stick around. Then we'll be chatting with Warwick Johnson-Cadwell about his new comic, Falconspeare, which hangs out in a totally different area of that Mignolaverse dork forest. Rob, thank you so much for returning to Comic Book Couples Counseling. Welcome.
Oh, thanks a lot. I mean, it's great to be back. I genuinely enjoyed chatting with you guys last time. So yes, I'm hoping this time it won't be a traumatic experience.
Oh, pressure's on.
Pressure's on. Thank you for those lovely words of affirmation. We do need them. I'm super excited to talk to you about the Mignolaverse and the Sword of Hyperborea. I'm kind of curious how you came over to this realm of comics in particular.
Well, I mean, first off, I mean, I'm a big fan, and I've been reading Hellboy and BPRD for many years, and me getting involved actually came through Lawrence Campbell, who's a good friend of mine, who's the artist on the Sword of the Hyperborea, and the fantastic artist on it. Lawrence has been he drew BPRD for maybe 5 years. I mean, the kind of weird thing is Lawrence and I go way back, and I think I remember I was reading BPRD and going, you've got to read this, before he was even reading it and was aware of it. And then, it's weird how the world turns out. And then he ends up, being the artist on BPRD for 5 years. So there you go. But I mean, Lawrence had been talking to Mike and Dark Horse about sort of doing a kind of barbarian Galdena story. And I think Lawrence had some visuals in mind, and they didn't have a writer basically. So Lawrence, because he and I worked together recently on a book called Old Haunts, and Lawrence is one of my best friends anyway. And he said, look, would you be interested? And I had previously met with Katie O'Brien, the editor, at New York Comic Con one year, and she and I had talked about my potentially doing some BPRD stuff. So it all kind of, the timing was right, and it all kind of came together.
And this character in particular, one that I kind of adored immediately upon their introduction, and because it's such a natural fit with Mignola's Robert E. Howard influences. Like, here is a Conan the Barbarian type character in the world of the BPRD. Is this a character that's just like a natural fit for you? Do you find an attraction to those same influences that are fueling this character?
I don't know if I struggle to say it's an absolute natural fit for me. I'm not entirely sure I've written a kind of barbarian kind of story before. But I mean, I guess it goes back to, as I said, I was like a big fan of BPRD. Galdena, there'd been several stories, kind of notably, like I think James Harron drew a couple of them, which were just stunning. And Howard's, I mean, if people aren't aware, Galdena is a barbarian character who exists in the Hyperborean past, like thousands and thousands of years ago. But he kind of has a weird connection with a BPRD member in modern day called Howard, who picks up this sword in a temple in Chicago, which is a big point of our book, and suddenly gets Galdena's kind of memories, I guess you would call it, suddenly becomes part Galdena and part himself, even though the thousands and thousands of years separate these two characters. And so, I mean, that was kind of a cool kind of idea to sort of, place this barbarian character in a modern kind of setting and, fighting all these monsters at the end of the world, and as we know happened in BPRD. And then it, for me, it's just what interested me about the first issue was, spoiler alert, if you've read BPRD, and if you haven't, you should.
Yes.
The kind of the humans lose and the world kind of ends. And they fight this epic battle over many years, and it's a losing battle. And there's sort of a core idea of, as is said on page 1 of the Sword of Hyperborea, is like, do you think we lose? Or is all this for nothing, or does it matter? And if you're this character who lives thousands of years in the past, and you know that all this battle, all this hardship, they're gonna lose at the end, so you kind of go, well, what's the point? I found that a really interesting story because, I mean, at the end of the day, in a way, if you want, I don't want to get too heavy, but it's kind of like, that's something we all face. You know what I mean? We all know that our demise is out there waiting for us. You kind of go, so what? So is the fight worth? Are the good things worth fighting for still? And we all do it. We all carry on. And I think one of the things you'll find as the series progresses is you'll find the other characters who have held the sword at various points, and their lives are touched just by the effort and the fight, the battle that Galdenna goes through to pass the sword on, and then they pass the sword on, and lives are affected, and it shifts the world in certain ways. So, it was just a very. As soon as we latched onto sort of, this is an exciting core idea, an emotional idea, and it's not, a Hellboy spin-off for the sake of a Hellboy spin-off. At the end of the day, we want to make you really care about these characters, and hopefully you do.
At one point in the story, Galdenna wakes on a funeral pyre and he says, like, I live even though I know the world ends and the monsters devour all light and hope. And I feel like that's particularly meaningful in the Mignolaverse because it has this special relationship with endings with consideration to, like, Hellboy is gone, Abe Sapien is gone.
The world is gone.
The world is gone. And I wonder, you've been living in the Dread universe and writing in the Dread universe so long. I wonder if anything you've learned from the Dread universe about endings, is there anything from that you bring into this story?
There's a line I really like about the Dread universe, which is in The Small House, which is a graphic novel I did, where basically that world died, and all anything that the judges are doing or Dread is doing, or anyone still alive at that point, is effectively clinging on by your fingertips into a pit that was dug a long time before. Yeah. So in that sense, I think, there is a real kind of resonance with where Galdenna is and in this story, in the Sword of Hyperborea, because he knows they lose. But I mean, one thing I would say is, like, again, it's spoilers if people should read BPRD and Ragnarok, the last few graphic novels. But you see a scene at the start of this issue of Sword of Hyperborea where Howard's holds a bridge to let the last humans get across to get into the underworld. And if he doesn't do that, then those are the last people alive, and just the fact that he does that, there is hope, because they make it, Yeah. We don't know what happened to them. That's a story that hasn't been told yet. But so even when all is lost, I'm sounding very optimistic now. This is good for a Monday. Even when all is lost, who knows? There is still hope in the future somewhere. We don't know where those stories go yet.
It reminds me of a Brené Brown quote. I don't know if you know about Brené Brown, but she's like one of my personal, like, experts. I think about her so much. And she has this quote that's like, hope is not an emotion. It's a way of thinking or a cognitive process. So hope is something that exists when you see a way out. You see a way out of something. And so what makes this relationship between Ted Howard's and Galdenna so interesting is, how do you find hope separate from knowing the ending of something?
Yeah.
Right. So, like, you can even know the ending of something and somehow you have to continue to exist.
Yeah. I mean, I think hope is hardwired into us, and as this part of the human condition, right? I mean, even just like wanting things is, you know what I mean? It's like if you could be at your darkest ebb, you know what I mean? And there's still, you hope for something. Doesn't mean, it doesn't mean you necessarily are going to get it. I think it's just, I mean, it's kind of knowing. I thought it was there's a scene in the Sword of Hyperborea, which I'm very fond of, where Galdenna is on top of the mountain around a fire, and he's looking out at these impossibly huge mountains. He's at the end of the world. He's thousands of years away from the woman he loves, Liz. Mm-hmm. And he just says her name, Liz, and I just kind of thought that was really three letters, and it's just a human moment in an impossible world at the end of a universe. It feels like, you know what I mean? But it's there's something bright there. He sat around a fire amidst all this darkness. It's a really, whether or not readers pick up on that, but I think that was a moment where I thought that was particularly great. And also, I think it plays into something that when we first had Zoom meetings with Mike to discuss this, one of the major things Mike said about writing in this world is because you don't want to explain too much, and that's a really sort of smart line, because I think the more you hint with this stuff, loving Hellboy over the years and stuff, the story isn't entirely. I think Mike knew it. Mike knew where it was all going, but you don't spell that out, and exposition on the page is pretty horrible. So having things like not fully defining what the Galdena Ted Howard's connection is, and having this mysterious wolf turn up and say Chicago to him, and then he says, "I understand," and we don't say what he just understood, and that is to me, as a writer, is that type of connection is quite exciting, because immediately the reader, you go, I really want to know what that is.
Right. Yeah. And, as a longtime Hellboy reader, those moments of mystery and revelation, they send shivers down your spine as you're reading, because you don't know exactly what it means, but it means something. And the other aspect of BPRD in particular that I try to highlight when selling the comic to people is that it is a realm of real consequence. You read Marvel comics and the Earth will get spun on its axis, but then by the end of its 12 issues, the Earth will be righted again, and New York City's fine, guys.
But absolutely.
When apocalypse occurs in BPRD, you're now living in that apocalypse for the rest of BPRD. Like the Plague of Frogs happens and it doesn't unhappen. And I think that also relates to Dredd and how Dredd as a character ages and continues. And there's no backseas in either territories.
No, and it's everything feels like it has stakes as a result. And if something happens, it's gonna stick. It's gonna last, And I think the one other thing I think with Dredd and the Hellboy BPRD world have in common is the willingness to kill off amazingly great characters. And they're gone, and you're going, oh. And if it's Marvel or DC, that they're back. They're coming back. I mean, nothing. Everything feels a little bit like nothing means anything in that regard. But I mean, just BPRD, you had characters like Roger, and Johan, and in the containment suit, and just some of the best, most memorable characters, and they, again, spoiler alert, but and Dredd's been like that throughout. I mean, basically, Dredd villains don't hang around. I talked about this last time. You go, that's a really great villain. Oh, they're gone now. We'll never see them again. Oh, okay, fine. Similarly for a lot of, Dredd's great supporting characters. As a kid, just when Judge Giant died in Block War, as a kid, it was just still like, you can't do that. You can't kill Judge Giant, and it means something, as a result, and. The stakes are what we saw in BPRD, which we didn't realize, was as we sort of Ogdruhem, I'm probably mispronouncing it, sort of rose up these enormous monsters, and the world changed, and then suddenly you slowly began to realize, oh crap, this whole story has been about telling the story of the end of the world, and we just didn't realize it because we're predispositioned to think that the good guys will save the day, and it wasn't that kind of story. And again, with what happens with Hellboy at the end, it's not that kind of story. So, but there is, the world, this universe and the world goes on, and like as we saw it in a little sort of mini flash sequence, you saw the frog people, in the future, and you saw sort of what looked to be Liz Sherman in a crystal, at the end of BPRD, and it was like, oh, okay, so there is more.
to me, a character like Ted Howard's / Gall Dennar cannot work in a universe without consequences, because it would just mean nothing. Because of their relationship between the sword, with one person being in a coma while the other person is creating change in their own timeline, like, we now have essentially one character who can affect change in both the present and the past, which is like the human dream. We always think about the past as being this like huge, immovable thing where we just have to kind of adjust to in the present. But now, even though those two timelines are so greatly estranged, they are now closer because of this one person.
Yeah.
And when Gall Dennar wakes up on the funeral pyre, like most of his tribe is like so happy to see him. Oh yes, finally, this great warrior who has visions of the future is back. But there is like one dude, Mekthar, who is like, what is the point of having this powerful warrior if he can't be truly present with us, if he's not with us all of the time? And Gall Dennar is like, Mekthar is kind of right.
Yeah, he's got a point.
Yeah, what is the point? And so sometimes I wonder, like, do you relate to that as an artist? Because when you enter like the Mignolaverse, you have this entire timeline at your disposal. And now even time is a construct in the Mignolaverse, but you are only there for a finite moment of time. And in that moment of time, you are there to either maintain the status quo or affect real change. And do you find that intimidating? Do you ever despair in the face of that? or do you like go like, okay, I'm only here for a certain amount of time. I'm going to affect all of the change that I can.
Well, I mean, what I would say with that, I mean, it's not my first rodeo in as much that I've with Dread, John Wagner is the chief architect of that world and always has been. I've worked in the Marvel universe. I've worked in the DC universe. I think you are always intimidated. I mean, God, you're really intimidated when you come in. I think for work as good as Hellboy has been and BPRD has been, which is genuinely some of my favorite comics of the last 2 decades, you don't want to mess it up. I know that much. So that's very the quality, the standard is very, very high. But you also kind of you don't want to seem like it's a dance. You dance in as much that you don't want to come in with a tone which feels nothing like the universe at all. But you also want to bring something of yourself to it, And also then, I mean, one of the interesting things about Sword of Hyperborea is issue 2, issue 3, issue 4, you will meet brand new characters who Lawrence Campbell and I have invented. And you are seeing aspects of the Mignolaverse you've not seen before, because these characters are brand new and their struggles are brand new. And but we're trying to kind of interweave them with some of the actions you saw in sort of a Witchfinder, the miniseries, and all this stuff, which is pivotal. And if you're, want to deep dive in the Hellboy history, Edward Grey and all that type of stuff. Yeah. So I like to think, and if we've done our job well, we've created a comic that if you've never read Hellboy and BPRD before, you'll still dig it. If you do love the timeline and you can join the dots, you will get a kick out of recognizing certain things. But our main goal, which is a job, is always the case, no matter what the gig is. We want to create characters we want you to care about, and we want you to, we're going to probably put them through hell, and we want you to sort of feel bad for them or feel happy for them when they succeed or whatever. And also then, do it in a visually stunning way, which I think is inherent with this universe. It has to be, the best looking comic books. because they always have been, and anything that isn't is people are going to feel shortchanged because you're talking about Mike Mignola, Duncan Fegredo, Guy Davis, James Harron, people like that, and I think what Lawrence has done here in sort of Hyperborea is amazing. And when we did Old Haunts, our last book, we were seeking a kind of very cinematic kind of look, rooted in kind of like Michael Mann films or something. I mean, Lawrence is very, very good at that, but he's also just a really fantastic storyteller. But I think in Gal Denner's journey, we wanted it to feel epic. We wanted his quest to feel like it's been going on for years. And there's a great double-page spread of you see him fighting pterodactyls and walking woolly mammoths, and we want this to feel like an epic. He's not just popping down the road to the shops. In that world, if you go on a quest, it is a serious business, and hopefully this all feels like it has stakes and personal stakes as well as big stakes.
Yeah, and I mean, Lawrence Campbell's. He is a top tier BPRD artist. And, Lisa and I were talking about just the first few pages of this comic. And when you get that first panel of Howards getting ready to enter the end of the world, that is such a momentous shot. It just builds from there. And I do think that if you were to give this comic book to somebody who has not read BPRD, through that mystery that you and Mignola were talking about, not wanting to explain things during your Zoom call, through the mystery of this, a first-time reader can go like, okay, there is a large world and a large mythology out there that is super interesting, but it's also not alienating because I think you don't rely on exposition.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, and I hate exposition on the page. It's just death. I mean, I have no interest in reading comics where there's we're going to explain everything that went on in the next few pages. You know what I mean? You want to kind of just grip people's, heart, and you want to grip their guts, really. You know what I mean? And take them, take them along. That first page is like, that was sort of a statement of intent, really. It's just kind of, you just see this guy, this is who our story is about. You could easily go, oh, we're going to open with a splash of a big monster or something, I wanted it to be that first scene. It's him and Liz, and this is what's worth fighting for. And the world might be ending, but like she says, she actually makes him smile for a second. You know what I mean? And I get choked up even thinking. Oh, love it.
Well, that's why I connected to this story so much, because I think that Gal Denner in particular, having grown up with this sword in his life, I think that he's always been kind of forced to think at an epic scale. But now that he has Liz, all of a sudden this epicness is so intensely personal, and he goes well, how does this epicness relate back to me, and how do I continue in the face of epicness when I feel like I don't get to have, or I don't get to spend the time in the places that I cherish and I feel like are very important to me.
Yeah. And also he's a small cog in a I think he's aware in a very large wheel, Mm-hmm. I mean, when you I recently reread Hellboy, Darkness Calls and The Wild Hunt and
the Fegredo trilogy.
So it's amazing stuff. But like Hellboy there, I mean, everyone he meets is going, you are the most important character in this universe, constantly, right? And he hates that. He doesn't want that. He just wants to be an ordinary guy, which is part of the tragedy of a character. But I mean, it's just like, I guess, who are you in Star Wars if you're in the original trilogy, if you're not Luke Skywalker? It's just... and that's, it's kind of one of Gal Denner's things in this is I have to pass the sword on, but what's the, that's a very, you're Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in Hamlet. Do you know what I mean? You are you are one of the background characters, and is there a point in that? But the fact of the matter is, as it kind of, it all goes full circle in the first issue. You see Howard's use the sword to as I said, to allow the last humans to escape. And everything that Galdena does, actually, thousands of years in the past, actually saves the human race. But he doesn't, he's there on a mountain in the middle of nowhere going, what is the point? Because he doesn't know, actually. He doesn't know. That's one of the tragedies, actually, I should say. Because Howard jumps in to fight the monster.
Right.
He doesn't get to see them escape. He doesn't know if they make it.
Like one of the things that the wolf said in the vision is like, you are not the sword. Right. The sword is something separate from you. So you are not necessarily your purpose. You might be the wielder of your purpose, but your purpose is ultimately going to be passed on. And the time we've spent with Ted Howard / Galdena is so precious because we know that from the little blurb at the beginning of this comic that this isn't a story about the individual. This isn't a story about Galdena and Ted Howard. So this is a story about the sword. And so we're going to be following this object being passed from person to person and how each individual wields that object. And objects in literary culture, not just comics, objects are always like these weird, precious cruxes that live outside of time. So how is it writing a story centered around an object that is either a metaphor or not? It could be a metaphor, it can be an object, rather than I'm writing Galdena's story.
Do you know what? It's great because I think if as a writer, especially on a story like this, I can't speak for anyone else. You need something simple in writing because basically you will lose your mind. There are a billion writing options and you won't get anywhere. So this is why I think writers, we need structure. We need a straight line. If there's a billion choices, show me a light somewhere on the horizon, and I'll go towards it. Mm-hmm. And that's what the sword is. The sword is our tether. It's our structural MacGuffin. As Hitchcock called it. It doesn't matter what the MacGuffin is. He said people just need a MacGuffin in the story, and so that allows us to sort of move through time, through thousands of years of history in a hurry, in four issues. And we do a big leap from issue 1 to issue 2. Issue 2 is set in World War I, was the backdrop, and then we go to World War II, and then we go in the last issue to the 1950s, and I won't say much more than that because I don't want to spoil it. But it's kind of also it's a great looking sword, right?
Right.
It's very memorable. I mean, it's the one of the fantastic things about Mike's art. When he designs a lot of his stuff, it stands out. It's would have been so easy to make it just like this big sort of warrior sword, but it's so distinctive. And something we play on visually as a metaphor going forward is it does split in two different directions at the tip, which is kind of
interesting. Yeah.
We'll make more of that as we progress.
I love the sword because it is just like this big hunk of metal, this ancient metal. It's not Excalibur. It's so old.
But Excalibur is a good touchstone, isn't it? Because we're hardwired. The Arthurian myth is. I mean, it's heavy in Hellboy. You find out that Hellboy is actually a descendant of King Arthur along the way. But it's there is something to be said about holding a powerful sword up and going in to fight evil. But not something I've done myself. I can't speak for you two.
Not yet, anyway. What impressed me in this conversation that we're having now, Rob, is that when you are discussing the story that you are helping shepherd with Mignola and Lawrence Campbell and Quentin Winter, you still got emotional just thinking about the journey that these characters are going on. So clearly you connect with them in a similar way that you would have when you were younger and you were not a professional?
I hope so. I mean, I think that's just, if you're doing it right, and if you care, and I think it's pretty apparent if you look at this book that Lawrence and I put a lot into it and are very invested in it. You know what I mean? It's just like it's one of these nice things. You can get a bit, I wouldn't lie. I mean, you can get a bit jaded with certain jobs because, like anything, we're all sort of, you can go on. I feel like I'm retreading certain steps. This was I was genuinely bowled over to be getting to do a Mignola book. Yeah. I mean, I genuinely have loved reading these comics, like I say, for years. So as I said, I think you go in and you go, if I'm doing this, I really want to, we want to try and bring our A game to this, and we wouldn't dare do anything else. But I think you'll see in the characters to come as well. I think they're very, I mean, I always respond to this, but they're very human characters. They're not necessarily, which I think has always been the case in BPRD, whatever, they're quite flawed. And they're very, they're not necessarily the big sort of alphas who are going to come in and smash things up and go, I'm great. They've got their own personal emotional journeys. And so if you're finding that, if you're writing those characters, you always put a bit of yourself into them. And again, I think in the Mignolaverse, a lot of his characters are going to end up with quite tragic ends. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily a world where people come out happy. And so, there's a lot to get emotional about.
Well, my hope for this book is that it inspires a serious fandom for Gal Gadot. Why can I never say it? Gal Gadot. Gal Gadot. Jesus, man. And Howard's, to the point where I can finally get an action figure, because I've collected, the Hellboys, the Abes, the Johans, the Liz's. But I like, this is a figure that belongs in plastic.
Oh yeah, Howard's does, definitely, with his big BPRD crest on his chest and that body armor. Yeah, they should do that. But yeah, we got some great ones coming up as well. So yeah, if I would be more than happy if they ended up with the characters in issues 2, 3, and 4. If they end up with their own, similar. But we'll see. And if all goes according to plan, there might well be more stories to come with some of these characters. We're talking about it, so we'll see.
Well, issue 1 of the Sword of Hyperborea is out now. 4 issues in total. Rob, where can our listeners find you online? We're going to have links in the show notes. They can see it down there. But in case they don't look at those actual show notes, where can they find you to continue this conversation?
You can find me talking nonsense on Twitter most days with at RobWilliams71. And I've got a website which I've not updated for quite some time, robwilliamscomics.co.uk, which I will, now I've said that, I immediately feel guilty and I will update it, I swear.
Awesome. Well, Rob, thank you again for hanging out with us this afternoon. Really appreciate it. Super excited about the comic and what future holds for the Sword of Hyperborea.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. It's as last time, it was a pleasure to talk to you both.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, for joining us for that chat. Lisa, I think we should have Rob on the show every year. We should chain him to that with like a contract or something.
Yeah, because you know what friends love? Obligations.
That's right. Yeah. So let's lay out the traps, and we should probably lay out a few more traps so we can also engage and capture Warwick Johnson-Cadwell so that he must also return every year to chat with Comic Book Couples Counseling, because this interview you're about to hear is also a tremendous delight. And Falconspeare, and really the Professor Mindheart and Mr. Knox stories in general, like, these are very special. Like, there's nothing in the Mignolaverse quite like these comics. They started with Mr. Higgins Comes Home, and then Mignola was just like, Warwick, you go off and do your own thing with these characters. I don't care what it is. And then Warwick Johnson-Cadwell did Our Encounters with Evil, and now Falconspeare, which, Lisa, you just wrote a really glowing review of Falconspeare for Comics Bookcase.
Yeah, I did. Like, what I enjoyed about the first 2 volumes of this series is that they're so concise. They're short little stories. They contain a mystery. They're very fantastical. They really enjoy living in that kind of buttoned up Victorian space.
Yeah, there's a humor to them that is biting, but very silly.
But this third story is so different because I feel like it really is a true departure from that which is fantastical and kind of enchanting.
Although that stuff is still there.
It's still there, but it's earthier. It's more grounded. And it's really about it really embraces the areas of Victorianness that we don't really talk about, where the Victorian era was a time where it was like this tremendous amount of progress in technology without a complete understanding of how it worked and what the success means. Mm-hmm. And it leads to this very superstitious, paranoid atmosphere where they go like, well, what is separating me from like the generations before me? How come I'm not engaged in manual labor like that? Oh, it must be because I am so dignified. It must be because I am so private. And it just gets where they get to this place where the principles have to be so rigid. Mm-hmm. And so in this story, one of their cadre is missing. James Falconspeare is gone, and they receive this mysterious correspondence in the mail, and they go like, well, what does this mean? And they find out that Falconspeare has been dealing with this very different type of mystery and struggling alone with it.
Yes.
And it's about engaging with that aloneness and the kinds of decisions people make when they are completely isolated with their own principles.
Yeah, and at the center of that isolation is an evil that is so now.
This is the darkest of these stories yet, in a way that I kind of didn't expect, and it caught me off guard.
Yeah, well, this
in a good way.
This conversation that we have, which sadly Lisa was not able to attend, but Warwick and I chatted about this in particular, and how this third volume, how Falconspeare became what it is. And we also talk about how Mr. Higgins Comes Home came into fruition, and what a unique place that Warwick Johnson-Cadwell holds within the rest of these Mignolaverse comic books. So if we could do one thing with this episode, I hope that people who have not read Mr. Higgins Comes Home or Our Encounters with Evil or Falconspeare, that they go out and seek these books out. You can pick up Falconspeare, which comes out this upcoming week. You can pick that up, read it, and totally enjoy it. You don't need the other books to understand it, but you're going to want those two other books. And, there's not a lot of reading here. You can do it real quick. You can do it in an afternoon, and you're going to want to binge them right quick.
Well, let's get into this chat because I haven't heard it yet, and I'm curious.
Warwick, thank you so much for joining us on Comic Book Couples Counseling. It's a true pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me along. This is great.
Honestly, when I got the email that this interview was a possibility, I let out a little squeal because Mr. Higgins Comes Home is one of my favorite Mignola-related projects. I think it's like a little crown jewel within the Mignolaverse, even though it's not really a Mignolaverse book either, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fantastic to hear. Really fantastic to hear. But yeah, no, it is funny. These books are they're a thing on their own, which is, a mighty privilege because it sits there with Amazing Screw-On Head, which is one of my sort of, that's probably my most returned to book of his.
Yeah, and mine as well. That's a great comparison. These two definitely sit next to each other on the shelf. And I'm kind of curious, though, if we could start our conversation with your relationship with Mignola's stories, his artwork, where you first encountered him, and then like what is it like to evolve into a creative partnership and then now kind of running wild with that universe?
Well, it's bonkers, is what it is. I mean, it's crazy, but I just knew his stuff. I didn't realize I knew his stuff. I used to work at a comic shop a million years ago, in the sort of early 90s in the town where we live, and it's pretty sleepy. And I worked Saturdays or weekends or whatever, but I was just getting paid in comics. I was just bringing them home. And so there was lots I was sort of picking up, and I hadn't realized, I mean, even still now, there's stuff that I recognized his works quite quickly. Mm-hmm. And at that time he was doing X Factor covers and other bits and pieces, just lots of covers and lots of, that I was really enjoying. And books as well, things like the Savage Land bits and pieces, but then the Topps Dracula, and that's just sort of everything. I sort of focused, but every now and then I see comic covers pop up, old classic as I think I remember that, and I've got that one, not realizing that he'd been doing the inking on there's so much of the American comics that I was loving before I realized that was actually him working on that as well, and so from way back, I've been influenced or excited by his style. And then, it was not long after that, Topps, I went to college, went to do a degree in a different city, missed Hellboy #1, which I've never yet managed to pick up a copy of, but and that was it. Hellboy was amazing. So how do you initially hook up? He wanted to tell some sort of Hammer influence stories, or I think he also references like the Fearless Vampire Killers. And I've read interviews where you've discussed how these books are inspired by your memory of Hammer films. Yeah. What's the origin of this particular project? We knew each other. I knew his work, and just been going over and over it through the books for years and years. And it's just a big source of inspiration. And the subject matter, his subject, is similar, even if it's not sort of the horror stuff, but the sci-fi stuff. And he was into something that I was also into, and and probably influenced by that, but. I was drawing his bits and pieces. I was drawing some of his stuff. I did. I think the first time there was any sort of contact was I had drawn Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Do you know the film?
Oh yeah, yes I do.
Yeah. Well, it's a witch versus invading Nazis, and so
it's so good.
It's with the great battle at the end. I mean, just. The battle at the sequence at the end just blew me away, but it just made sense. So I was just drawing for popping stuff up on a blog, and I was drawing Hellboy characters with Bedknobs and Broomsticks characters in this, it just sort of daftness, and that got to Mike somehow. That got to Mike and had an email just to say he liked the stuff, and I was quite blown away by it. But so we sort of, he knew, I knew he'd seen my stuff, and we sort of followed on Facebook, and then we met in Thought Bubble, the UK's biggest, the best comic show that we have, and we happened to be on a sketch panel. There was 4 artists on a sketch panel together, and he was one, and I was one of the other 3, which was just incredible. And so just got to say hello then and watch each other drawing over each other's shoulders. And I went round with a pile of books to give him and to get one of mine signed. And he just made a comment that we should work together and do something. And I just, I've said a few times, but if that was the last thing that had ever happened about it, I'd have been happy. That would have been perfect for me. But no, he'd get back in contact every now and then, just for the next, I think it was the next month, a couple of months, just to say, I'm just, I'm a bit further ahead now. I've got an outline now. I've got this, and at every stage, I just thought it was gonna finish, gonna stop, and that would be the end of it. But it just kept going. So,
and I'm curious about the evolution from Mr. Higgins Comes Home to our encounters with evil to now Falconspeare. And, I'm looking at the credits page of Falconspeare, but it seems to me that Falconspeare is like truly like from your heart and brain.
Yeah. Yes. Mike wrote Mr. Higgins Comes Home, and I drew it, and that was, that whole experience was crazy. But then I asked, the professor and Mr. Knox were just great. I mean, everybody, I was drawing this book I was drawing Mr. Higgins, just thinking of different things. I was drawing, what could these other characters do, and who's these guys? And he's just got these great people, these great characters, and he just sort of drops in, but then nothing happens. That's it. And I'm thinking, well, these people could, and then it sort of got even beyond that, because the way I was drawing it, I was starting to think, well, this environment or this, this furniture there's everything. It was just so inspiring. There were stories piling up from all over. So I said, could I have a go at doing something with Mr. Higgins? Not Mr. Higgins. I thought we'd leave that. If ever he decided he might want to come back and do something with that. But Professor Meinhardt and Mr. Knox, and that was okay. And so I wrote Our Encounters and Falconspeare now too. So he's quite conscious, I think, that his name's on the books, but he's having to sort of correct folk online and bits and pieces, just to point out that I've written and illustrated both of these books, but I think the credit needs to stay there, because the influence he's had and the encouragement I've had from following his work and bits and pieces, these are, there's quite a lot of Mike Mignola in all the books.
Sure. I was a little stunned by Falconspeare reading it, and I'm dancing around, not spoiling anything.
Yeah.
But the antagonist of Falconspeare was not what I was expecting, but I was also kind of just like delighted by it and how it spoke to the systems in place that propagate evil as well. It felt like a very 2022 comic book to me.
Well, I mean, that's great to hear. I mean, it was the idea, we've already had the devil, the devil's turned up. So, who could be worse than that? And well, actually, in the long run, I mean, the devil, I loved his character in Mr. Higgins, because he was just like in to cause trouble. He was, he appeared and hid, and just, it feels like he's just up to mischief. So I thought, well, what could be worse than the devil himself? And, and so started to think about that, with these guys, equipped to fight all manner of creatures, what barriers, what problems could they sort of encounter to doing that? And so, it was, it was just an interesting, it was an idea I thought was quite interesting. And so
I would be curious about the construction of that idea and how Falconspeare plays into it. And, the comic starts off 15 years earlier, and we see Falconspeare in all his glory, only so that we can jump to the present and we learn that something has happened with him and we're not exactly sure. And then we get to learn what happened and who's to blame and all that stuff. And so what was the initial spark that became this story? Was it Falconspeare? Was it the villain? Was it the structure, an image?
Well, there's always lots going on. As I say, just drawing around, just getting into Mr. Higgins, drawing around that. You're looking at reference, sort of making stuff up, and as I say, watching those old Hammer movies and Universal films, but which often sometimes felt a bit different. As I say, my memory of them, it obviously is sort of 12-year-old. You shouldn't be sitting up watching them, or shouldn't have crept down to see something ghastly like that. You've got no idea what's going on, and so the memories of those sorts of things are often quite different from a rewatch of the films, totally missing the point of some or making up. But so there's always sort of stories, many things going on at the same time, and so these things can come together sort of quite quickly, because you remember an idea that had, or maybe there's a new idea popped up, and suddenly two other things have glued themselves to it. I mean, I drew when I first got my copies. My first show was not a comic show. When I've got my first copies of Mr. Higgins, it was an illustration fair in a city nearby, and it was the first time I'd sort of got American format comics. Normally, before that, I'd been sort of doing my sort of small press. I'd been printing my own bits for this sort of thing, but it was the first show where I'd got copies of Helena Crash and Tank Girl. I think I had, which had been out before, and then Mr. Higgins as well, and it was exciting, but it was not the right show for it. So for my table, it was pretty quiet, although I was just bursting to show people and sell this stuff. So I sat and drew. I was drawing a vampire or vampire hunter for every book that was sold, and it wasn't the Falconspeare that's in the book now, but there was a version of him that was drawn sort of on that day. So, before Encounters with Evil had turned up, I think he probably could have ended up in there. But I was just trying to work out how to, where this character would work. And so then thinking of the situation in Falconspeare, he sort of appeared there. So, I don't know if it's a handy thing having an untidy mind or a twice as untidy studio, but these ideas are all over the place, and sometimes they can stick together. So it's more than one thing happening at a time. So I don't know where the connection came between the two of them, the idea and the character.
I mean, the impression that I'm getting, I love hearing how, as you were writing or creating Mr. Higgins, even drawing furniture was creating a creative energy in you. And so the impression that I have is that you could tell Professor Enoch stories God knows how long.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that would be. I mean, I know, I think I've got away with quite a lot so far. I mean, I thought I got away with quite a lot when the second book came out. So, but I mean, yeah, these guys they're a great group of characters. Those two, Mary Van Sloan and, even Falconspeare as well. They're just, they could go into all sorts of places. And indeed, there are ideas to send them all around the world.
Good. The other delight that I take from these comics is their format as well, and how Dark Horse publishes them in these $14.99 hardback, pretty, like almost digest size, not quite digest size collections. They read so well and they read so quickly. I would like a whole, I want a whole shelf of these stories.
Well, I would like you to have a whole shelf. I just say, I mean, if nothing else, just look at putting the three out on a tabletop to look at those covers. If they could keep, I could keep writing them. If Mike would do another cover for each of them,
awesome.
And but they're great, and I love the format. I love the way that they are presented. They just look brilliant.
So the first one comes out in 2017, and you're working in pencil and ink. Are you still working in pencil and ink?
No, and I wasn't Mr. Higgins and Encounters, and they're all in pencil, very scruffy pencil, and then worked again with a tidier pencil, and then that's digitally sort of fiddled to get the black line, and then digitally coloured.
Okay, and so it is, because I'm reading currently Falconspeare digitally because I don't have my physical copy yet, and I was just looking that it feels like there has been some sort of shift or change in how you're executing the illustrations, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But am I completely wrong?
Well, no, I think. There wasn't a big change in the intended way to put them down, but Falconspeare was sort of made in a fairly funky year, of course.
Yeah.
And
I'm just looking at it from like the coloring standpoint as well. Like, the blood in particular has a different quality to it. And I don't know if it's also if I'm just having an emotional reaction to the narrative, because I feel like Falconspeare's narrative, I mean, they all have a little bit of a somber tone to them, but there's a little bit like a steeper dip in that somber quality in Falconspeare. And I feel like I notice it in the color choices.
I know it is. And that was one of the, I mean, I just get so nervous with these things. So excited when I have the idea, and then so excited to be able to work on them, and that's, everything's going to be brilliant. This is going to be brilliant. And then, they're finished. And then there's a long time between them finishing. And then I'm suddenly thinking, what was I thinking? Did I get that right? How is it going to, and so there's a long line of kind of nervousness. And one of the things is, I love Mike's humor, and I loved, in Mr. Higgins, there's so many fantastic bits that I loved, and so I was trying hard to keep that in the spirit of the books, but I knew that this one was going to have to step back a bit with some of the gags, with some of the sort of the lightness, because it is a darker story, and I don't know whether maybe with that in mind, I'd been working differently with the color and bits and pieces like that. But
I don't know. Right now, I'm looking at a page where the biter is involved. That's all I'll say. And a character center panel has resigned themselves to an action, allowing something to happen, and that just. The expression on that character, how that character is centered on that page, the coloring of the sewer around that character. Like when I turned that page hit me, because you see the center panel first. Yeah. And you're just like, oh, yeah, okay. We're going here.
Oh, I mean, that's amazing. Obviously, it's so exciting because that's the plan. That's what it's a big moment, and there's lots of sort of things like that in here, and so I think it sounds a bit like a previous answer, but I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and I'm not sitting there, I don't sit down sort of, right, well, this is what the color's going to do today.
Sure.
And this is what this is going to go. And so it's these ideas going along together, and I draw a lot. I don't know what these are. In my mind, I know what scenes are going to look. Well, no, hang on. That's the point. I don't have an idea of what the panel's going to look like before I draw it. I don't draw it from my head down to the page. I've got the idea in my head, and I work it out on the page. Okay. And so there's lots of drawing and redrawing and sort of over many layers. And so a lot of this stuff sort of is seen, or not quite for the first time, but as it goes down. And so trying to sort of get the mood right and the actions right and the pacing, sort of I can adjust the different elements at a time. So I don't, the sewer sequence, that sort of thing, there was a colour change because of the environment they were in, and there's certain themes. There's a big sort of deal with circles all the way through that sewer thing, just to sort of, so it sort of sits like a chapter. So, and these things go on in other parts of the book as well. But I think to try to tell certain parts of the story, because it's not all sort of a steady level all the way through.
And so you don't do layouts?
No. I do very quite small layouts, and then I do for very rough layouts, and then work from those. Mr. Higgins was something I hadn't tried before, which is I sort of worked extra big, but individually with the panels. So I was drawing layouts, and then I was drawing what sort of, we have the A sizes, so A3 size, which is sort of original art US comic board size, but that might just be for a sort of a large top panel. And so I was doing the drawings that size, and then sorting them out into how the page would be, then printing that out, and then drawing the pages that way.
Okay, yeah, because it does feel like very purposefully paced. Yeah,
it's a combination. I mean, well, again, working with Mike's script was exciting because he was. I think it wasn't a method I'd worked with, but I think since then I've heard it's been used more often. But he'd give a script of bullet points for each page as to what's happened, and I was sort of able to sort of fiddle around with the panels and bits and pieces and decide how many and what's going on in that respect. And then he would go back to have another go with the dialogue, whether it was to add bits or take bits out or to move bits around to fit the page, and that seemed like quite a good process in terms of sort of being able to have a look at how things are going and maybe make adjustments to it at that stage. So,
all right, fascinating.
So that's been fun.
Yeah, I love all this process stuff. So Falconspeare is the third one of these. I want many more, but you seem satisfied that you're just happy to have done 3, but I guess you would also like more.
Yes, I would love to do. As I say, there's a lot of ideas that sort of bristling out of the books. And so, that I'd like to have a go at. So yeah, it would be great to do more.
Like for me, I think one of the joys reading your comics and Falconspeare in particular is that it is a comic where I really want to share panels with people, and I think there is also like a memeability to several panels in Falconspeare that I think would be a delight to share with followers on Twitter and things like that. There is a boom in Falconspeare that I feel like I could fold into my normal vocabulary of emotional online experience.
Oh, there's got to be a boom in a Mike Mignola comic somewhere.
Yeah. I have a friend who obsesses over booms in comics, movies, and what have you. And I have not shared this boom with that friend yet. But Darren, you've got a really great boom in your future if you're listening. Warwick, this has been like such a delight to chat. I could talk to you forever, and I would love for you to come back at a future date to discuss more comics with you.
No, it'd be a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Now, Falconspeare comes out on the 25th of January here, hardcover, like I said earlier. It will fit right alongside the other two. Other great thing about it, it's not continuity heavy. So like if you have not read Mr. Higgins Comes Home or Our Encounters with Evil, you can still just pick this one up and run with it.
Yeah. Yep.
So
doing there's 3 different stories in the 5 chapters of Encounters with Evil, and I kind of wanted it so it could, you didn't know where Mr. Higgins would have been, whether it was before or after, or perhaps even in between. The only sort of chronology with these guys is that opening sequence in Falconspeare when they're back in their sort of younger years.
Right. Now, for our listeners, if they want to continue this conversation with you online, where can they find you?
Mainly on Instagram at Wocco, WOCCO. That's my lifeline. I've got a very sleepy website that hasn't been tampered with for a long time. A very lazy and gently moving Patreon at Patreon. Wocco is the name
Right.
on the Patreon. But Twitter at Warwick JC. But Instagram is the way to go.
And we'll have links for all of those places in the show notes of this episode. Just look there and start clicking. Warwick, thank you again so much for chatting. Have a wonderful evening or early morning where you are.
Yep, early morning now. I'm revved up on Haribo sweets, and so I could stay up late enough, and I've got to do something to quiet myself down again.
Oh, well, I'm off to have coffee because I got to go watch a movie for another thing I'm doing.
Oh, cool.
So have a wonderful evening.
Cheers.
See, Lisa, we do need to lay out some traps for Warwick along with Rob. He needs to be part of our returning guests, our prisoners.
Okay, so I'm going to dig the hole, and then you gather the leaves.
I loved that conversation. And the thing I keep thinking about is how when he was crafting Mr. Higgins Comes Home, just the act of illustrating these tiny pieces of furniture were igniting these bursts of creativity, and how these characters and stories were just bursting from his brain during that process. And it highlights how questions like mine of like, I know I didn't say it like this, but I basically said like, where do you get your ideas from? How foolish those questions are, because there is not one place where ideas spring.
But I do think that there is one state of being where ideas happen, and that is a state of open acceptingness, like a place of confidence going, like when he is focused and drawing, he is affirming to himself, I am an artist.
Yeah.
I am a person with ideas, and those ideas bear fruit. And I think that sometimes starting a project is the hardest because you're editing as the ideas happen.
Yeah.
You know, like, well, that's not a good idea. Look, not all of my ideas are beautiful and equal.
Yeah, and it sort of also speaks to why Mike Mignola's name is still on the cover of Our Encounters with Evil and Falconspeare, even though he is not technically writing any of this content. It's from his world, his brain, his characters, his original ideas, and everything Warwick comes up with is tethered to that atmosphere and those ideas.
Tethered, but not like in a limiting way. Like,
no.
Now the kite is being held. Let's see how far this string can go.
Yeah. And we're just the little kitties on the grassy knoll observing the magic in the sky, right? Mm-hmm. It's a great place to be. The Mignolaverse, this is our celebration of it. If you have not partaken in it, here is your entryway. Go buy these comics, The Sword of Hyperborea #1 and Falconspeare. Links in the show notes to both of these creators. We are so grateful that they joined and got to chat with us about one of our favorite worlds that we love to visit over and over and over again. And next week, we're going to talk to another creator about another world that we have a great fondness for. And man, this is going to be a treat, everyone. We're going to be chatting with Scotty Young.
Yeah, we can't believe it either.
Yeah, it's super cool. He's here to chat about I Hate Fairyland. He's got a new Substack release, and the title is quite a mouthful, but also equally delightful. The unbelievable, unfortunately, mostly unreadable, and nearly unpublishable untold tales of I Hate Fairyland. And I think we'll probably talk about a few other comics that he's made. Stuff like The Me You Love in the Dark from Image Comics, one of our favorite titles from 2021. Yeah, all right, let's get prepared. Let's take some time. Lisa, we've got some movies to watch. We got to go attend Sundance tonight. Let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here, but stay in here, because it is a virtual festival. We are battening down the hatches. We bought hatches.
We bought hatches. They've been battened. We've got lots of microwavable food to eat.
So where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
You can find me on all social medias at Mouthdork. If you have words of affirmation for our logo, you can send them to Aaron Prescott at A Cool Hand Fluke. And if you have some words of affirmation for our radical banner art and poster, send them to at Karen_X-Men fan. Lisa, where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
Me?
Yeah.
I am always accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on Instagram and Twitter. If you'd like to spend more quality time with us, you can subscribe to us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, Google, and Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to get exclusive, you can join our Patreon, where you'll get more content, including weekly bonus episodes.
If you'd like to reach out and touch us electronically, you can email the podcast, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, comicbookcouplescounseling.com, or follow us on Instagram and Twitter at CBCC Podcast.
You can give us the gift of 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and if you'd like to do an act of service, why not write a review of the show while you're there?
Yeah, just do it.
We are fluent and receptive in all 5 love languages. It really warms our hearts and helps the pod.
So until next time, friends, keep your love tank full.
And your psychic rapport open.
Doopy doopy bum bum ba ba.
You are now in session with the Comic Book Couple Counseling Podcast. Lisa Gullickson.
And Brad Gullickson.
Not using that. I was being a goose.